as Coach and Kaufman, it's been a while since I've had this guy on the show, and we have been wanting to do this for quite some time. So the guy to the left of, as I'm looking to my screen, maybe you're right, depending on where you're looking at it, good friend of mine, head coach at W.T. White High School, the famous or infamous and soon to be author, perhaps, Mr. Tony Johnson. Coach, it is good to see you, buddy.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me, man. Always good to be with you.
So, Coach, I was going to start out by kind of getting a wrap on how you're doing, how things at WT White are doing. So, actually, let's start there because there is some breaking news from the college baseball world, and we kind of knew this might happen with school shutting down. And of course, you and I both know the California State University system decided they weren't going to have classes in the fall, which I think surprised everybody. But let's first get an update from you. How are things going from the head coaching world, the football world, the school world? Because right now, Tony, we're sitting here and we don't even know if high schools or any schools in Texas are going to be open in the fall.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to, I want to say this. I think it's still too early for these universities and these places to make statements and make lavish, what I consider to be lavish, outlandish decisions. We still need to follow the science. We still need to let our leaders make decisions. Yes, you have to plan. Yes, you have to organize those plans. But I think it's still too early in this thing to go ahead and start shutting down universities, etc. As far as what's going on down here, I'm on a couple of committees with the UIL and with our ISD. We have 3 plans in place in Dallas. Dallas being one of the largest school districts in the state of Texas. We have 3 plans in place. Plan A obviously would be we're going back to school on a normal time, normal schedule. Plan B would be no school in the fall at all until we have an antibody or some kind of vaccine that can thwart this virus. And C, which would be more than likely a modified schedule for our student athletes and our students in general, where our students would go to school maybe on a Monday, Wednesday schedule, and some other students would go on a Tuesday, Thursday, and then Friday would be remote learning. And so I would imagine that some sort of C schedule is what we'll start with. What does that look like for athletics is the great question, because I certainly don't want to have practice on Monday and Wednesday with one group and then practice again on Tuesday and Thursday with another group. And then how does that work? Are the kids that don't come to school Monday and Wednesday allowed to come up at 4 o'clock to have practice every day? Because certainly you have to get acclimated. You have to learn to tackle. You have to get your body prepared. And then you start thinking about football in general, and probably the hardest sport to social distance, if that has to stay in place. Obviously, you have to tackle. You have to exert energy. You have to block. And so you're going to be touching people. School districts are going to have to buy temperature gauging machines to read the forehead, to take temperatures. Lots of disinfectant, lots of gloves. Laundry is going to have to be done every day. Busing issues. So there's just so many issues that one begins to think about that it makes your head explode when you think about it. But our leaders are doing a great job. Our leaders are meeting and planning, but nobody's just coming right out and saying, oh, no school. So again, I think it's really premature to do that. I'm like you, Todd. I've seen the recent tweets or Facebook posts. Louisiana's back to work as far in terms of letting their high school athletes lift weights and condition. The state of Kansas is going to start opening up June 15th. The state of Nebraska opens up this Monday to kids to go back to summer strength and conditioning. So we're seeing it in less of what I would call hotbed areas where it's beginning to loosen a little bit. Louisiana's a little bit of a question mark. And so I'm prayerful and hopeful that this will open up for us as well. I've heard 2 dates from the UIL, 2 dates.
So, I certainly don't want to run this like an interview, Tony, but I know with you being inside the schools, and we don't have a lot of sources for, people have their opinion, right? It's going to be, and there are some, Tony, that say we just have to open schools and kids are going to get sick and we're just going to have to deal with it. From somebody that's inside of a school, if somebody came to you and said, let's just open schools. And we're going to have kids that are going to get sick. There's teachers going to get sick, and that's the price of doing business. How do you respond to somebody saying that?
I'm torn, Todd, because I think I've told you this before. Some days I wake up and I'm like, let's go. Well, this is just nothing more difficult than the flu. But then there are days I watch the data, read papers, read the internet, watch the news. I try to stay informed. talk to people and I go, whoa, pull the brakes, let's back up. And so there is Tony Johnson's personal side and my personal opinion, and I'll keep that closely to the vest right now for this conversation. But if somebody came to me and said, let's go, I think that's premature. I've heard June 15th with proper social distancing guidelines, no more than 6 foot apart, 25 at a time for student athletes to come back to summer conditioning in the state of Texas. And then I've heard July 6th. So those are the 2 dates, June 15th and July 6th. And I think ultimately, Todd, we're going to know more Monday when we hear Governor Abbott here in Texas speak.
And I certainly don't think that any of the school leaderships across the ISD, whether it's here where we are in Prosper or Salina or Dallas, or, I think a lot of people were surprised in your ISD in Dallas, where they came out, 2 weeks ago, and said they anticipated distance learning in the fall, and everybody's going, we're not even through this school year. Everybody was shocked that not so much that somebody made that statement, but that it was Dallas that made the statement. Everybody was shocked it was them.
Well, I think Dallas, again, one of the largest school districts in the state of Texas, great leadership by our superintendent, Michael Hinojosa, and our athletic directors that run our district. But I think they had an obligation because of the size and the scope of things in Dallas to start putting a plan together. So honestly, I got that same reaction. People said, oh, it's too early. And I do think some of these universities that you mentioned earlier, like the state of California, closing down automatically with fall, that's silly. And I honestly think they'll actually pull back from that in a month or so. But I think our ISD in particular, as large as it is and with as much attention to detail as it needs to be, had to make some type of statement. And they were right. I mean, distance learning became what we are. I heard last night on the news, the district even said that not necessarily this coming fall, but in future, we may go to some type of virtual learning. And as an educator, I've been doing this for 27 years. I remember 10, 15 years ago where they said by the year 2030, we'd all be distance learning, and so am I surprised that eventually this is going to be the new norm, as that phrase is thrown around? And I just don't know how it works with athletics.
Yeah, and I think the hard part, and speaking of athletics, and you're right, I mean, the California State University system coming out yesterday saying that they were going to cancel classes for the fall semester, and I kind of scratched my head because we're not even through the middle of May yet. Why make that announcement so early on? We haven't even hit summer, and you just said, give it another month. What's the harm in waiting instead of making this announcement? I thought that was drastically premature.
Mention it to you personally. My birthday is Monday, and this weekend, my wife wants to get together with some friends and go out to a restaurant and celebrate my birthday, which I certainly would love to do that, but I don't feel comfortable. I'm still curbside pickup guy. I go to Target, I go to Walmart, I go get my hair cut. Now that they're open, but I'm still cautious, and I'm taking the measures that our government officials recommend, and I'm honoring what our government officials are saying that we should do. I'm trusting them. And so I'm washing my hands. I'm wearing a mask. I'm doing what's necessary when I do have to go out. I'm not locked up in my house and hunkered down, scared for the world mentality. But I just think it's a little bit premature. I know our economy needs to get going again, and I want our economy to get going again, and I want people to get back to work. And I'm praying for everybody to get back to work. And I've got friends that are out of work. I've got a niece that's out of work. So it hits close to home for me, buddy. But I would have everybody exercise a little bit of caution instead of just canceling.
Yeah, and there's so many of these topics, Tony, that everybody wants to talk about. We talk about face mask, and I my wife just did it the other day because she had to go back. She has been away from the stores with her job for a while, and she had to go back for the first time yesterday and had to wear a mask. And I remember her coming home saying, God, I was so incredibly claustrophobic. I didn't realize that was going to be my reaction. And to me, it goes back and forth. Do I feel comfortable if I was forced to wear a mask, but I do it? Yeah. But at this point, I'm not being forced, so I don't feel the need to do it. Right or wrong, I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong. And I'm not, and I know it's protecting other people, and that may be. But when you also hear from the CDC and from medical people that masks aren't exactly 100% effective either, what are we doing?
Yeah, your point is well taken. And again, I go back, I saw a report yesterday where Dr. Fauci said masks aren't necessary, where a week ago he said that they were, and back and forth and back and forth. So I just, out of people's fear, I think early on when this first started, I think we're on over 50 days now, I've been home, I would get up and walk. And here's the sad thing is I would walk by people and they would jump the curb and go to the other side. And I know I'm not pretty to look at, but goodness gracious.
That's for sure.
That got me going. How sad is this? This thing is taking away somebody like myself, who's such an outgoing, how you doing, huggy, fist bumping kind of guy, to now I'm walking on the sidewalk in my own neighborhood and people are, jumping to the other curb. So I wear it. I wear it when I'm in the store, wear it when I'm walking, just to give people, like you said, a sense of relief and relaxation. Look, I don't know if this thing works or not, but I got it on. I'm honoring what my city officials say. I'm honoring what my government says, and I'm going to respect authority and do what they ask me to do until they give us the all clear.
Yeah, the stupid thing.
I want to go to my church.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and you and I are exactly the same way. And I think that's the one thing you and I probably would agree that we miss the most. We miss being in church. I mean, we're not trying to turn this into a religious podcast. We can talk about faith all day long because I know how you and I both think. But I think that's the one thing that I look at and go, that's the one thing I probably miss the most. Not necessarily the message, but music has always been a big thing to me. So not being able to be in worship and being around the people in the congregation and to feel that music shake the room and to feel those voices shake the room. But back to your point about people jumping the sidewalk, somebody just told me the other day they're in Kroger and somebody wouldn't even walk past him in the aisle because he wasn't wearing a mask. And he's just like, I mean, are we serious right now?
It's crazy. Todd, you can go into, and let this wrap around your head. You can walk into a hemp store and buy drugs, medical marijuana, but you can't get a haircut in some places.
Yeah.
You got to pay a barber $20 in a dark alley to cut your hair.
Yeah. Or, yeah.
So, a lot of it doesn't make sense to me, man.
Yeah, and we can't go to church, but we can apparently wait in a 30-person line at Home Depot. I mean,
I was in, where were we? Mary and I were in, where were we? Gosh darn, it might have been Target last week. We were in Target or something like Target. There were literally body-to-body people in every aisle. It was packed. It was a Sunday.
Yep.
And I'm going, how is this safer than me playing golf? Which for the longest time, golf was closed. But now I just go out and play golf by myself and walk. And so, yeah, it's crazy.
Hey, thanks for the invite. I had yesterday off. You should have called me.
Didn't know you played.
I've been playing since I was 8 years old. Are you kidding me?
Well, maybe I don't want to play with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I miss playing golf. I remember when you and I had our first conversation in a long time, and you were talking about you and your son, walking 18 holes. I'm like, God, what I would kill to get back out there. I mean, I miss that like crazy. But Tony, to kind of get away from the COVID stuff, one of the things I talked about on the podcast I did yesterday, the day before, when California State University, I think Tony's video just went away.
No, hang on. Back.
There you go. Okay. One of the things I talked about with the California State University system closing, and it wasn't necessarily about California, but I use it as an example, was some of these smaller schools may not be able to survive. And there was an article I saw, I think it was in the New York Times or something like that, where it said even the $14 billion loan or whatever for the schools that came out from Congress may not be enough if some of these smaller schools start to lose admissions. If some of these community colleges are loving this because, and there was a great point made by somebody who said, why would you pay the admission for USC or pay the tuition for USC when you're going to do online learning? Why not go do it at a community college? But now we're starting to see the financial impact with Bowling Green announcing that they're cutting baseball effective immediately. Tony, they're not going to be alone. This is not going to be the first time we're going to see this news.
No. And having coached and worked in the collegiate system at two universities and multiple NAI institutions, it is a dollars game. It's a business. And I think people lose sight of that, and they don't realize how much, just Google, how much revenue goes in the tank on all those other sports with the exception of football and even some universities lose money even with football. It's a huge undertaking for a college president, and I can't even begin to imagine. And it saddens me. You saw what wasn't just Bowling Green. I think it was in Nevada that cut swimming and rowing and some other things like that last night.
Yeah.
So you're going to start to see these sports that were barely hanging on, Title IX issues, but you're going to see lawsuits come about out of this as well. Because people are going to say, hey, you didn't provide me with an opportunity. I was a female scholarship athlete at your university. You cut my sport, yada, yada. The whole thing's a mess, and I'm really, really worried about the end result. But I get it. High school athletics and college athletics are gate-driven. And what I mean by that is they need a gate. The NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, they can survive without an audience because they have contracts, television contracts. You could play, but you take the University of Texas, 90,000 people at a home game, and you start to social distance by the guidelines, 6 foot apart, that every other row, and you're sitting there with a mask. Well, now you've taken a 90,000 seat stadium and made it 30,000 people. And while that's, 30,000 people get to go to a game, think of that revenue on a $30 ticket, the hot dog, the vendor, the parking, and on and on and on, and what that does to a university. And that football program carries. Gosh, I can't imagine how many sports that football program carries on their back, which provides scholarships to other people that play, maybe our lacrosse players or maybe our equestrian or on the rifle team or the swim team or the golf team. And now they don't have the money or the revenue to hang on, right? So, yeah, it's a mess. I think it's premature, but I also get it. I totally get it. I get the panic and I get the understanding of, man, we may not have class. And that's what a lot of it. If they're not going to be here, if there's not going to be butts in the seats, how can we afford to keep it?
Well, and I think the other point for this, Tony, is it's so much bigger than losing a sport, right? It's because there's so much attached to, you talked about University of Texas, and a lot of these schools count on college football, right, to carry some of these smaller sports. But if you talk about some of these schools that don't have a football, a UC Irvine, a Pepperdine, a Fullerton, they count on baseball, and even then, that revenue isn't very much. But let's say, for example, let's use Fullerton for an example. They cut baseball. What happens to those kids who are on scholarship? Where do they go? Because you look at, we can talk about USC and San Diego State and UCLA. They can't carry some of these kids that are losing scholarships. So what happens to them? Do they get their scholarship paid for? Are they allowed to stay in school and finish their 4 years? What happened? I mean, and also when you talk about schools that may end up closing their doors, and I don't know if we're going to see that much of a drastic thing happen, but now we're talking about communities who are, restaurants and small businesses and shops, and they depend on these universities. They depend on these students to be there.
Hotels around the area,
yeah.
Bring other teams in that play. I mean, the list goes on and on. I would hope that those athletes would have kind of retroactive, if they do distance learning, they honor their scholarship and they finish their classes online. But man, if they don't, again, that leads me back to what I said. You're going to see lawsuits, and I think you're going to see people eventually bringing action against the government of California and other states that follow suit because of denied education. That scholarship's good for an entire year. I know that. I get that. When you sign an NCAA scholarship, it is not for all 4. As some people assume. It is for 1 year, and then you have to re-sign that sucker every year. So, they don't honestly owe them 4 years, but they do owe them 1. And I don't know what the direct answer is going to be, but I don't think we're going to see the end of this. The ramifications from this are going to last a decade. Honestly, a decade. If in fact we keep this suit moving forward the way it is.
And this also doesn't just. The ramifications aren't just on the college game, because now we're getting back into your realm. And even though, you've got experience coaching in college, now you've been coaching in high school for a while now, the repercussions also go down to high school, because let's not forget, we're talking about potentially not having high school football in the fall because there's been no decision from the UIL. Maybe you know differently than I do, but I'm assuming at this point from my end, but some of these kids are being recruited. So what happens to them if these schools that are recruiting them don't have the financial ability to bring them on? What happens then?
Yeah, no doubt. And these are questions I don't have the answers to. But but you bring up wonderful points. Then maybe somebody a little bit smarter than me will jump on a podcast and give us the answer. But I'll tell you this, because you went back down that rabbit hole. I'll take it a different step. So I work in a school where we are getting better every day. I mean, our school is awesome. Our leadership's awesome. And if in fact, let's say the UIL says we can play, right? And let's just say for a fact, Dallas says, no, we can't have school and therefore we can't have football the traditional way. And we go away from what the UIL says. And I'm not saying that's been talked about. That has not been talked about. It's just a thought in my head. Will my players leave? Will my players say, hey, why am I playing for you when I can go up the street to Prosper where you're at or Salina, and I can see if that coach, since they're allowed to play, will take me. And so you begin to think about that for a minute, because that's real. Now, if we follow, if every ISD says, oh, the UIL says play sports, then the UIL and the state of Texas have to provide safety measures, not only for the student athletes, but safety measures for the coaches and the teachers. Think about it, Todd. I have 150 teachers in my building, 25 custodians, 20 food workers, and the list goes on, clerical workers. I mean, you're talking over 200 employees. Somebody's got diabetes. Somebody's got asthma. There are underlying health issues, right? You've heard that term used a lot, is COVID. So How do we keep them safe? How do we keep the kids safe? Do we have the proper disinfectant and the thermometers and the gauging and the equipment and the masks to go back to school on a daily basis? And I think that's, again, ultimately what our leadership's trying to figure out. And then the athletic piece, like one of the committees that I'm on, we're trying to figure out, we got the 3 plans that our leadership has presented, as I mentioned earlier. Now we've got to take those 3 plans and design, okay, how does practice work with the confines of that? And again, not to be, kind of just off the cuff here, but I mean, Governor Abbott is going to tell us a lot on Monday. I really believe that. I really believe Monday's press conference with Governor Abbott is going to be huge. I'll be tuning in just because I need to see what he says, and I think the UIL is anxiously waiting as well.
Tony, being in a classroom environment, and this is kind of what I'm curious about, because I know what I grew up with, between 25 and 30 kids per classroom, and there is no way to social distance. And I don't want to turn this into an interview type, but I mean, you are inside the school, so I would rather ask and get that perspective from someone that's there. But how do you go from 25 kids, you can't social distance, they can't sit 6 feet apart? Let's just take WT White, since you're there. In your opinion, not saying that you're not going to speak for the administration or the ISD or people who are going to make these decisions, but how as a teacher or how as a school do you handle moving kids around, moving seats around, doing the 6 feet, or is that just impossible? Is that asking something you just can't do?
I don't think it's asking something you can't do. I think I do see the difficulty in making that decision. Where do you start, and how do you make that? I mean, it makes my head want to explode, because we do have 2,000 students in our building. We do have 30 kids in a classroom. I do have 150 to 180 boys in a locker room during the athletic period when the bell rings, changing for soccer, changing for football, changing for basketball. The hallways are jam-packed every time that bell rings to switch classes. You got to turn, and you're bumping, you're hitting. There's no way you're going to social distance in a traditional way. You just can't. And so that makes me concerned and scares me a little bit. And so I know our leaders are tasked with a huge undertaking of trying to figure out how can we do this, have the traditional school, but be safe in doing so. And again, I don't know all those answers. I'm not privy to all those conversations. I can give you a little bit of minute speculation, but I don't have all those answers. But you're right, buddy. It is, when the way you just described it, it's daunting to me.
Yeah, and that's, and I've mentioned a good friend of mine, a guy that you know as well, the superintendent of Lovejoy ISD, Mike Goddard, and I'm glad I don't have his job. I'm glad I don't have your job because I don't want to do this. I don't want to make those decisions. And some of the arguments that I've been in, a lot of people are just saying we just need to throw open the doors. We need to go back to school. President Trump even said it, and to a certain degree, he's right. But there's to me, there's so much more to the decision than just fling open the doors and let's have at it. There's just more. There's more to go into the decision than that.
So let me ask you this. Let me flip the script on you. I'll ask you a question. There is so much more. But do you want to be the first guy in the state of Texas to say, "Hey, we're coming back. Everybody come in my doors. Everybody come into school." And the first kid that gets sick, and God forbid something horrible happens. Todd Kaufmann said, "Come on, baby, let's do this." So I think that's why everyone is so ready to hear the governor and hear our leaders. And we got to trust our leaders. We got to honor them. We got to wait and see what they say. Like the NFL's doing right now, they're contemplating a waiver. Do I sign a waiver to play? The NBA is contemplating that. Do I sign a waiver to play, finish out this season? And I just think there's so many. You don't want to be the first. But I'm with you. Personal Tony Johnson, just personally, forget what I do for a living. Personal Tony Johnson, I'm with you, man. I'm ready to rip the Band-Aid off and let's go. The data says teenagers, it's like getting the flu, right? And they're surviving. Yes, there's always going to be outliers, and more than likely they were with an undetermined, another condition. But I'm with you, man. But I have to be smart and I have to be cautious of everybody around me, and I have to leave my personal opinion out of some of those things. And unless Governor Abbott calls me and says, "Hey, TJ, I want to talk to you," and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you should tag that when you post this. Governor Abbott, call Tony. He's ready to talk.
Yeah, he wants to be on your advisory committee. Is what he. Head football coach and advisor.
He needs a good Italian. Up in New York.
Oh goodness, and Tony, it's and I got into a Facebook argument yesterday, and it wasn't to the point where, I'm not saying that schools shouldn't open their doors, because I think that they should. Do I think they? So here are two different questions. Should they? In my opinion, yeah, I think they should. Now the question and what the point I was trying to make was, will they? My opinion, and we'll wait to see what Governor Abbott says on Monday, I don't think they will. I think the ISDs, the school districts, the superintendents, the leadership, I think they're getting ready as if they're not going to open their doors in the fall. And not to say that schools like yours and Salina, Prosper, Lovejoy, Arlington, and all these other schools, they're not going to look at the California State University system and follow their lead or example. I'm certainly not saying that, but I just think 2.5 months isn't enough time for them to answer all the questions they have to answer going into this school year. So give them another 3 or 4 months. Let them actually figure out, can we do, and one of the questions I asked Mike was, can you do both distance learning and in-class learning? Can you do them both? And he didn't have the answer to that, and I didn't expect that he would. But 2.5 months isn't enough to figure out if they can or not. I just don't think it is.
I'm with you, and I think they're working. I know they're working feverishly to try to come up with plans. And that's all you can do at this point is have plans. If you don't plan, then you're planning to fail, right? So they have to have planning. They have to get the talking heads together and plan this thing out and have the safest approach. In the end, the rules will dictate the course of action we take, and the rules from our state, the rules from our governor, the rules from our country will dictate the actions we take. And so, I'm with you, man. I know it sounds like we're going in a circle here, but I want them to open. I believe they should open. It's Tony's personal opinion, but I'm with you. I don't know that we'll open the way you traditionally have school. I think it'll be, as I discussed earlier, much like our superintendent, it'll be a little bit of distance, a little bit of together, and then you have to work out the side pieces, busing, athletics. So I think they're taking the first piece, and then that's the secondary piece. I saw, just to kind of give your listeners some hope and maybe some thoughts to think about, a couple of things in all different extremes. The state of Ohio is flipping fall sports to winter, I don't know how they're going to do that. It's going to be cold. I already told you what Kansas was planning and preparing to do, and Nebraska, etc. Indiana and a couple other states are having football and fall sports begin in October and not play a non-district schedule. I personally would be more for that. I don't want to lose the senior season for these kids coming into this football season, but I'm willing, I guess if my opinion counts for nothing, but I'm willing to sacrifice my non-district schedule and a couple of weeks of prep time to say, hey, kickoff is October 15th. And you're going to play 6 games or 7 games, whatever it looks like, and then still have a playoff that goes into December. And I think you can do that. It'll be tricky because like a school like mine and your 4A, 3A, 2A schools where kids play multiple sports, that's going to be a little tricky. And the coaches are going to have to work together. And that's where guys like myself that are out come together and have to work out the differences. Because obviously your basketball coach come, December is going to be like, hey, let's go. I need all my basketball guys, right? But I think everything backing up, instead of playing in August, instead of playing in September, buys us time. Then if there's an outbreak, God forbid, a second outbreak in September, or you go to a school and an outbreak happens and you've got to shut the doors at that school, now you didn't jump the gun, you weren't premature with your statements, you had a plan, and you talked it through, and you said this is over. But God, you find yourself in October, everything's going smooth, everything's going good, play ball. Let's get after it.
What's the new normal, Tony? Not, and I'm not talking about schools anymore, but you talked about you and your wife being in Target the other day, and I'm like you, and not necessarily. I don't do Instacart for our groceries because I'm afraid to go to the store. I just don't like going. I just don't. I don't want to spend an hour and a half at Kroger looking for groceries. So if I get to spend more time at home and hang out here, and I can do it during the week, and I don't have to wait for my work day to be over to go do that, I'm all for it. But the new normal, the mask, the gloves, the social distancing, we're not talking about 6 months. We may not even be talking about a year. So, everybody talks about, oh, we need to go back to normal. I don't think there is such a thing, and I don't even know when we're going to see it again.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think early on when this first happened, I heard somebody on a podcast say that handshaking was probably a thing of the past, which is funny. I think much like yourself, I was raised in a world where, you shake a man's hand, you break it, and you look a man in the eye, and you get him in close. And I'm a hugger, Italian. We hug, we touch, we hey, how you doing? And I miss that. I miss being social with my friends and hugging people and telling them I love them. And any kid that's ever played for me knows I knuckle bump them when I see them. And I shoulder them, and I might even hug them and put my arm around them. That's how my coaches were. That's how my dad was. That's how I'm intentional. And so the new norm, as you ask, I'm fearful, is not being as intentional as you like and social distancing at least through next flu season until we have a vaccine is what I think.
One guy I saw a Facebook post from, because I interviewed him, God, this was probably 5-6 years ago now. I think he was still playing at Texas, I think, is Garrett Graff, a guy that you're very, very familiar with. I saw his post come up about the job that he just landed, and my first thought was, man, Tony Johnson has got to be one proud papa right now to see, the future that he, to go from the University of Texas to now a coaching gig and somebody that you coached coming up, and I mean that's the kind of pride that you have for somebody like that. And I think for a high school coach or college coach, when you see your players having success, I mean, there is no more pride than that.
No doubt. I'll be 40, like I said earlier, I'll be 47 on Monday, but I was just talking to a former player yesterday. It's funny you asked me that. So Cody Blanchard, if you're listening, this is a conversation we had yesterday. He's a defensive coordinator in the Houston area. And Cody and I caught up. I coached him at Bethany College. I was the head coach. And, we were just discussing, when does it stop becoming about winning and the next great job? And I said, man, for me, the winning never goes away. You want to win in everything, right? I want to win when I wake up. And it's just how it is. And watching this Jordan series, you can't help it. That's the era I grew up in, and I'm not comparing myself to Michael Jordan, but that's the mentality. You want to win, right? And you never lose that. But I think what you do get perspective on through your walk with God and through your maturity and age and just experience is successes of other people. I'm excited about the successes of other people that loved me, that loved playing for me, that were part of bleeding blood, sweat, and tears. I know what being a successful athlete looks like and what you put into it. And I know what lessons athletics teaches kids. And I know how important athletics are to kids and the maturation process that they will eventually get out of it. And how many times you look back and go, man, I didn't like that guy, but man, I sure appreciate what he did for me. I think as I got into my early 40s, I realized that was more important than any ring you'll ever get. And I've been fortunate enough to win championships and have rings and be in bowl games and coach some state championship kids. And I've had over 30 kids I've coached play in the National Football League. Some are still playing. Two to come to my mind right now are still playing and starting on NFL rosters. And I think about them. But the conversations with the Garrett Graffs, who was, I don't think Garrett was even a second-team all-district high school football player, but he was a good high school football player. The conversation of him calling me his freshman year and saying, Coach, I'm going to walk on at Texas. Give me advice. And me going in my mind, he's not going to make it. He's not good enough to make it. And then he makes it. And then encouraging him to stick with it when he wanted to quit, when the chips got tough. And then going into his fifth year on the team, and he's still a scout team player, and he's still getting beat up, and he's still there. And he says, Coach, I want to be a coach, and I want to be a college coach. And then to watch him get put on scholarship. And
that was such a great moment. That was such a great moment.
Yeah, actually get on the field in a Big 12 football game and in a bowl game. And maybe it was mop-up. Who cares? Much like my own child, and Garrett's like a son to me, when they realize their dream and they get on that field and they get that scholarship, tears just come to my eyes. And Garrett and I are like this. And not because Garrett can ever do anything for me, but just because of the connection that we have with this game and what we put into each other, the intentionality in which we built a bond and a relationship that it'll never go away. And so, I'm super excited to see where he goes. Herb Hand, who's obviously a guru, O-line coach, and a fun guy to talk to. If you haven't get Herb on, you should. But Herb told me one time when we saw each other at a convention, he said, Garrett Graff is going to be a Power 5 O-line coach in 10 years. And he said, Garrett Graff in 15 years might be a Power 5 head coach. He said, hey, that's high praise, man. Coming from the Texas O-line coach, that's high praise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those moments mean a lot to me.
Yeah, and that was, Garrett was a name that I brought up because I interviewed him at one point. We were up in Prosper just doing some small little show that, and I was really grateful that he came out and sat down for a long time, had one of the best personalities of guys that I've been around, down to earth, good kid. And I remember seeing that video of him when he came out, when they announced that he was on scholarship, and to see how excited the other players were for him, man, it was just, and it, not that Garrett and I we're more acquaintances than anything else. We've been around each other one time, but to see that and to see him earn that was, I couldn't have been more excited for him. And I was glad that he had that moment.
Absolutely.
Well, Tony, I have to wonder, you talk about Garrett and his head coaching path or Power 5 coach and up to head coach. I'm kind of surprised in your own journey that you're not back in the college ranks. Is that a decision that you made, or do you? And I don't want to put you on the spot and go, I'm looking to leave, but it's the impact that you have on and personally, for those that don't know Tony, to tell you how much impact he has on not just players. He's had that kind of impact on me, and he kicked my ass about something a week ago or so that, he holds me accountable. He was straight with me and goes, look, this is, you're out of line and you need, and that's something I think a lot of kids need. And the kind of impact that Tony has on people, that's the kind of guy he is. So Tony, along those lines, do you just feel like you have a bigger impact in the high school game, or is there something in the back of your mind that eventually you'd like to end your career in college?
Well, first and foremost, let me answer this. I'm going to be where my feet are planted, and it's taken me a long time to make that statement and be honest with you about making that statement and it being real. I'm going to be where my feet are planted. I'm going to be grateful for the job I have, and I am grateful. We have great kids, and I have great people to work with and great coaches that I work with. But I think, I've had so many opportunities to go back to college, and some were small. And I'll just be real with you. I'll just be transparent for your audience and for you. In 2012, my oldest son, was getting ready to be a senior at South Bend Prairie, okay, or 2011. And that summer, I had gone to Arizona to see my sister and have a little family vacation. And I got a phone call from the director of operations at TCU, who I worked for. I worked for all those guys. And he said, hey, this is an opportunity for you. Gary wants to know if you're interested in being the director of recruiting, which was a passion of mine at TCU. The job at the time paid an enormously low salary from what I was getting as Texas high school football coach and teacher. And I sat there for all of maybe an hour and thought about it, and I didn't have one hesitation in calling back and saying no, because I got the chance to coach both my sons, but also my oldest son, who was so passionate about the sport at that time. And when would I have gotten that opportunity again, right? And then in 2015, I received a phone call from the University of Colorado, and I had a phone call from the University of New Mexico about recruiting jobs. And they were all either right about the same salary I was currently making or a little bit below, like they were on the cusp of, and now I think the game has shifted, and I mean the game in terms of college. A lot of college athletic programs want that 25, 24-year-old former player to be in their recruiting or their operations jobs. And you still see some Texas high school coaches like Joey McGuire and other guys get promoted and get those jobs, but it's very few and far between. And so, not because I don't have opportunities, but I'm happy with what I'm doing. And I'll tell you this too, Todd. I like to play golf. I like to drive my Corvette. I like to go to the movies with my wife. I like to watch television with my wife. Not that makes you a lazy person, but there are just different things that you're going to sacrifice if you want to be a college coach. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of guys I talk to that, I got to be a college coach, Okay, well, you be prepared for that head coach to tell you what you're doing and when you're doing it 18 hours a day with no say whatsoever in what you're going to do. You're not going to walk into that coach and go, hey, man, I'm going to run the quick trip real quick and get a hot dog and, a soda. You want anything? No, it ain't happening. It's not happening. I did it. I worked for a Power 5 school. I worked for a guy that he outlined what you did 18 hours a day. And then the other hours you're sleeping or talking to your wife, stealing a 5-minute phone call at your lunch break, FaceTiming your kids for 10 minutes while you're on the road recruiting. And listen, recruiting isn't just juniors. You got to start evaluating sophomores. You got to start evaluating freshmen. You got to go to camps in the winter, camps in the spring, camps in the summer. There used to be able, you had 2 to 3 weeks off in the summer in 98, 99. When I was GAing at TCU, you'd have a couple weeks off in the summer. You could take your family on a family vacation. Few and far between now. So I say all that to say this. I would love to coach college football again. I'm not saying no, but the situation has to be right. My family situation has to be a little more secure. I'm almost an empty nester now. The kids are all over 19, but a couple still live at the house. And I'm almost at a point where, yeah, maybe I could entertain that, but I love being an athletic director. I love coaching high school kids. I love the impact I have on high school kids. And right now I'm treated well. I've got respect. And I get to go home when I want to go home.
Yeah, and that's, I've talked to several coaches over the years, and it's why, as I did the helping with kids with recruiting for, it was 3 or 4 years or something like that until I got a little too emotional involved, and a kid got his heart broken over an offer that got pulled at the last minute, and I went, man, I can't do this. There's just too much. You get attached to a family, and I'm grateful for the couple of families that I am still in touch with and that are still friends, and I still talk to the parents from time to time. And I can't imagine the schedule that, I know a high school kid, or excuse me, a high school coach, and the kind of hours that you're keeping. And I know you're looking at this going, yeah, we've got a pandemic going on, but thank God I get to play golf. You're probably home more now than you would be if the season was getting ready to start in 2 or 3 months. But is the passion for you, Tony? Is it still as strong as it's ever been? I mean, do you find yourself more passionate now than you've ever been?
I think the pandemic has increased my passion. I'll answer that in two ways. To coaching the game right now, yeah, you got to have passion or you might as well get out. So yeah, I still have passion. I still love seeing the guys compete. I still love Friday nights. We've done some things in our program to alleviate so much work on the weekend so that coaches can be home with their families more. I love right now at this stage of my life coaching coaches too. I'm very passionate about that. So being an athletic coordinator, athletic director is something that I could see myself doing and maybe stepping away from coaching in the future because I do love coaching coaches. There's so much about impacting adults, like you mentioned, just coaching you through that situation you had. And I need it too, don't get me wrong. But being able to coach adults, I think, is a lost art. And I love that aspect of it. And then I know that adult is going to take that to these kids that need it and hear it. And so, man, there's a piece of that I really love. So, yeah, I still have the passion. This pandemic has increased my passion. I've still got to, people say, I want to retire when I'm this or retire when I'm that. Legally, not legally is not the right word, but I can actually retire when I'm 57. So I got to go 10 more years to get my full retirement the way I want. So, I mean, for the most part, Todd, I got 10 more years if the good Lord lets me live to do that. So, whatever aspect that is in, whether that's an assistant coach, standalone AD, assistant AD, whatever that looks like, college, I've got to make wise decisions for my family and make sure that I protect them. But yeah, I still have the passion.
And for
I do have to jump on another Zoom here in about 5 minutes. I need to tell you that.
No, it's all right. We'll wrap up. And I, just real quick, if you want to follow Tony Johnson on Twitter, where can they find you, Coach?
It's at Kickslide, KICKSLIDE at Kickslide, and on Instagram it's Assembly OL5. And so yeah, both of those. So I'm pretty much into social media. I think it's a great way to communicate as long as you're staying positive and staying away from all the negativity. And obviously they can find me through Dallas ISD's website, and they can email me too.
Tony, I appreciate you doing this. I wish we had more time. I know you and I are going to catch up offline quite a bit here over the next several months, and I appreciate everything that you've done for me. You've been instrumental in keeping me accountable on some things, especially kicking my butt last week was needed. But I appreciate you, man. It's been good doing this. It's been a great show, man. We got to do this again soon.
I would love to do it again. I'm honored to be your guest. And when we come back, you left it out. We got to talk Chiefs and Royals.
We'll do that if sports actually comes up. But we'll wrap up. For myself, Todd Kaufmann, for Tony Johnson, thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will catch you on the flip side. So long.